Yes, thank you for joining today's webinar on astronomy of the ancient Indians. Our special guest is Dr. Raj Vedam, also faculty at the University of America, one of our most active faculty out there speaking on these issues in so many places around the country and the world. So glad to have Dr. Vedam on today's webinar on astronomy of the ancient Indians. Well, there's a couple different aspects to this, just astronomy, the history and methods, but let's get started. So the question's kind of the framing question that we landed with is Indian astronomy merely a grand mashup of mythology, astrology, incorrectly copied astronomy of the Babylonians and the Greeks? Well, that is what you will find in books that source colonial, missionary, and Eurocentric descriptions of Indian astronomy. So today's speaker, Dr. Raj Vedam, will highlight the importance of studying the authentic growth of astronomy in Bharat, which clearly demonstrates an unbroken tradition of novelty, innovations, and unique methodologies, consequently acquiring great accuracy in mapping the movement of celestial bodies. So that's the background on astronomy of the ancient Indians, our webinar today. If you haven't yet, please put in the chat and I will shortly introduce Dr. Raj Vedam, who will make a presentation and definitely blow our minds with probably a lot of information as he's known to do. Who else? We got Lakshmi Ji from Boston. Thank you for joining. Rashik and Jyotsna Ji from Torrance, Los Angeles. Glad to have you on. So with that, let me introduce Dr. Vedam. Dr. Vedam, if you'd turn back your camera on. Welcome, welcome. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, glad to have you on. So Dr. Raj Viam, he actually had a whole career, right? Master's degree in electrical engineering from the Indian Institute of Science in Bengaluru, PhD also in electrical engineering from Oregon State University. He has over 26 years of professional experience in power, electronic design, automation, oil and gas industries, and has worked in applied mathematics and engineering across multiple disciplines. He has several patents and international journal and conference publications on that subject. Now he's working on international journal and conference publications on the confluence of these interesting ideas: applied mathematics, engineering, algorithms, computer science, also using the tools of archaeogenetics, archaeoastronomy, archaeology, pursuing evidence of knowledge transfers from ancient India. Dr. Raj Vedam has put forward a strong thesis with verifiable facts on the antiquity of the Indian civilization and the many discoveries made in ancient India. He's taught 2 courses at HUA so far: Reconstructing Hindu History, the omissions and the commissions. I think you've offered that several times. Many people have been waiting for Dr. Vedam to offer another course at Hindu University of America and this subject on ancient astronomy. We hope you will deliver another 100 lectures in India and the US on these subjects. And so with that, let me hand it over to Dr. Vedam to get this webinar started. Dr. Vedam?
Thank you, Ankur Ji. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, full screen, good.
Okay, let me get organized a bit over here. Just give me 1 second and we'll start in just a second over here. A lot of clutter on my desktop over here, so got to clean up a bit. Okay. All right. So namaste. Welcome all from wherever you're joining. I see people from Brazil, Chile, Mumbai, and all over. So very glad to have you here. So my talk is going to be loosely on the history and methods of Indian astronomy. And this is also the title of a course that I'll soon offer at HUA. So I'll give you a glimpse of some of these topics in today's webinar. Before I start, Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. So we are in a pretty strange world, I must say, because there is a lot of evidence staring at us in the face about the Bharatiya civilization, but an enforced narrative exists out there telling that, no, this is not what it is something else. And the roots of all these problems go to a corrupted chronology because of Western distortions, the colonials, the missionaries, Eurocentrics, and so on. So, this is what has led to a lot of problems in our appreciation of Indian knowledge system, which astronomy is a huge part. So, I always do this prerequisite, even if it is a talk in astronomy, we need to understand how the study of Indian astronomy is impeded because we have a corrupted chronology out there. So we have got a situation where the colonials, the Eurocentrics, the missionaries, socialists, and the Marxists all have a common axe to grind over here when it comes to the Bharatiya civilization. They do not want to see the civilization exist for a variety of reasons, whether it is to show the superiority of the Western civilization or the superiority of God over your God, those kind of situations, or whether it is the past is all primitive and let's jettison the whole thing so that we can have progress in the future, a classless utopia, or the notion that all of history is the history of class conflicts. And in India, there are so many classes, conflicts, and so on. That is all there is to history. So these are all the various axes to grind, which have all come together with a common purpose over here. So we see things like this. We see narratives like oppressor, oppressed. This is the only way to view all of Indian social dynamics, notably brought about by the Marxists and the socialists, or the notion that Indians are backward, primitive, stagnant, superstitious society, as the colonials, Eurocentrics, and missionaries try to project it as, or like the missionaries who try to say that there is something called caste system and Brahmins are evil and those kinds of notions, which came about with their hope to convert Indians to Christianity and so on. So, what we see in the narration of Indian history or historiography is these frameworks have been applied. They have subverted the history of India, hijacked it, imposed ideologies, and led to a subversion of our history, identity, and everything in the present. So it's critical that we, as rational thinking people, should seek the evidence of who we are as a people and or the Indians are as a people, and rebut some of these narratives. So, at a very high level, these are the structural problems in Indian history. We have an enforced narration in the NCRT textbooks, in the administration and academia all over the world, and so on, which maintains that there is something called an Aryan invasion or a migration theory, where certain people are supposed to come from Central Asia into India in 1500 BCE and started the Vedic civilization in India. And they say that Indians, as a consequence, are made up of Aryans, Dravidians, and tribal people. And they also say that yours is a young civilization, it is not an old civilization. So these are the kind of narrations out there. But our evidence, in particular, what I've been working on for the last several years, shows that there is no migration into India as such, but we can identify several instances of migrations out of India. We can also show that at the genetic level, or even more, our identities are all manufactured, if you call it as Aryans, Dravidians, and tribals. There is no such thing at the genetic level. We can also show that the Indian civilization is very ancient as opposed to some of the narrations out there that we are a recent civilization. So again, how do we evaluate the claims? So I, as a scientist, like to look at the methodology. I like to see what is the data people use to put forth a claim and what is the provenance of the data. Can we try to analyze the data? Is it high quality, medium quality, low quality? What kind of models have they used to put forth their claims? And can we critique those models in terms of their assumptions, in terms of are they best in class methodologies, and so on and so forth? And the methodology used, and finally the claims that arise from their methodology. So this is what we have to do as rational thinking people when we encounter competing claims and try to see where things are. And as I shown on the slide, we need a scientific, rational, logical analysis of the data, models, methods, frameworks, and claims. And there is so much of data out there for history. I say that just lift a rock and you'll get some data for history. Literally, that's how rich it is. And we have data in archaeology, climate records, genetics, astronomy, sciences, religion, literature, oral records. So many, many areas keep giving data that we can use to build a coherent narrative out there. And this data can be used in conjunction with a linguistic model or an archaeology model or a genetics model or an astronomy model or various other models. So our model-based analysis will allow critical analysis of the claims, methods, assumptions, constraints, data, and so on. So once we have the data, we check the provenance, we look at the assumptions in it, we see what methodology went into these models over here, what assumptions went into these models over here, and then we see what kind of inferences and claims people are making and seeing whether such claims bear out from the methodology that has been followed. So this is what we do as scientists, right? And this is the methodology to be followed here also, and that is what I follow in this astronomy course that I teach also. So, in my courses at Hindu University of America, I have pioneered a model-based analysis of historiography, where I'm looking at the linguistics model, textual model, archaeology model, genetics model, astronomy model, southern model, several other models like climatology, geology, and other things. And we look at all of these models to see where are they crisscrossing on an evidence-based narrative of the Indian civilization. And I have a two-part course, which I'll offer once again sometime later, and that addresses all of these things. So what is this claim that has got us up in arms over here? This is the so-called Aryan invasion migration theory, where they propose bands of male warriors came from Central Asia to India, either invaded or migrated in 1500 BCE. They effectively replaced the existing civilization of India or drove them to the south so that they became Dravidians. And these are the Aryans supposedly who came in here. And they're supposed to have brought an entirely new Vedic religion, Sanskrit language, Vedic ecosystem, and so on. And the methodology and models that are being used for this kind of proposal is from linguistics. So linguistics has offered the backbone for such narrative. And by analyzing that model, we can see how sound it is, or should I say unsound, and what arises out of that. Anyway, one of the heavyweights in this area is Max Muller. So he proposed through linguistic analysis that the Vedic works can be put into four buckets over here. The first is the Chandas period from 1200 to 1000, where Rig Veda was composed and so many other things. The Mantra period, the remaining books of Rig Veda, 1000 to 800 BCE. The Brahmana period, with the remaining Samhitas, Aranyakas, Upanishads. And the Sutra period, six Vedangas, including astronomy, Jyotisha, has come about in India between 600 and 200 BC, according to a whole lot of linguists, of whom Max Muller is a prominent figure. So, and this claim impacts our talk today, because if we accept this, then we have to say anything in Indian astronomy came about only after 600 BCE and so on. So these corruptions are not new. They've happened over 300 years and led to a lot of layering of claims in India. So this is through what I call the colonial hegemony, the imperialistic model. People like the Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British, hand in hand with Christian imperialism, what I call the missionary model. People like Robert Caldwell, G.U. Pope, Abbe Doubois, and other such people, and Eurocentrism, of linguistics, anthropology, what they call caste, linguistic model, people like Max Muller, Herbert Risley, and so on. All of these things have got certain claims they put forth, like is a post-flood, meaning after Noah's flood, religion. It is caste-ridden. Dravidians are oppressed people. Brahminical Aryans are evil. Aryans became a race in India, although Arya has been an honorific in India, it became a race. And there are two language families in India, according to the Eurocentrics, and so on. So whole lot of bigoted narratives came about because of the worldview they were trying to project at that time. And this has become encoded. And today that has become received wisdom for a whole lot of our academia, where they don't challenge any of these things, but they've layered it with the socialist and the Marxist models, using methodologies from archaeology and genetics, which are again subverted to align with linguistic analysis or with their claims on linguistics and so on. With circular dependencies, it once again impacts who we are as a people and what our history is. So all of these things have to be understood in their context if you have to understand what is going on with Indian astronomy. Why am I even bothering to tell you all these things in a talk on astronomy? Because it impacts us pervasively. Every aspect of Indian knowledge systems is impacted by this. So, in this false narrative, they say there was an Aryan invasion of migration in 1500 BC, where illiterate nomads, they didn't have a script, mind you, so they were illiterate, oral tradition. They came from Central Asia, destroyed the superior civilization of Harappa that existed there. Then these illiterate people are running around in India with caste cows and all those kind of things. And India had to wait for 1,000 years before civilization returned to Magadha. How? After Magadha made contact with Alexandrian Greeks in 300 BCE, suddenly we got the Brahmi script, Ashokan's script, and all this kind of pillar and all those things, and we became civilized according to them overnight after contact with Greeks. Then they say you have not had enough time for knowledge generation in mathematics, astronomy, medicine. Therefore, if you have superior works like Surya Siddhanta, like Shushruta Samhita, or like Arthashastra, and all these kind of works, then you must have copied it from the earlier civilization, like the Greeks, Babylonians, and so on. So, in order to reconcile this kind of a paradoxical view that Indians have got advanced knowledge systems, they positioned it as having copied it from the earlier civilizations. So, in this cartoonish image that I've shown here, the claims are Aryans brought Sanskrit into India from Central Asia. They say the script Brahmi is derived from the script called Semitic script called Aramaic. From Levant, it came into India. Astronomy came to us from Babylon. Mathematics and sciences came to us from Greece. Turkic Muslims got us culture, cuisine, architecture, music, civilization. And the British, let's not forget that, they gave us science, technology, rational thought. Prior to that, we were a bunch of superstitious, illiterate people who didn't have darshanas or any such thing. But this is the kind of thinking, even bhakti, devotion, has been taught to us by Saint Thomas, who apparently landed in Muziris in Kerala, and then he taught us how to do bhakti, devotion, and so on. So there's a denial of agency in history, and that has led to this enormous distortion of our identity and so on. And there is a, I call it a criminal distortion of Indian civilization, the anchor points of chronology. Every aspect of our knowledge systems and identity has been subverted because of these five frameworks I put forth earlier. So please keep this in mind when I do this seminar today. So to show how the Westerners encountered Indian astronomy and proceeded to distort it, some history on that in addition. How did they encounter Indian astronomy? Through various channels. The Greeks encountered Indian astronomy much, much earlier through a couple of channels. I will not talk about that here. But the Westerners, later, colonial period, they encountered it through these people I noted here: Cassini, Lee Gentle, Euler, Bailey, Playfair, Davis. All of them, when they encountered Indian astronomy, they were absolutely fascinated with it. They said that Indian astronomy is so old, ancient, and amazing, much ahead of anything Europe had and all those things. And they wrote glowing accounts of Indian astronomy. But then William Jones came along, and he was a linguist guy who observed that Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek are seem to be related. And why are they related? According to him, the proposal was there was a ancestral language called Proto-Indo-European somewhere in Central Asia, from which the daughter languages of Europe as well as Sanskrit have come forward. So that was his thesis, why they are related. But that also began the controversy, because the controversy was that these Aryans have come to India in 1500 BCE and Sanskrit was developed in India in 1500. That's the claim. If that is the claim, then how can Indian astronomy be ancient? Evidence of antiquity of Indian astronomy. How can that be ancient? So linguistic theories introduce the first distortions. Among the controversies, how old is Indian astronomy? Where did they predispose a question saying it came from the Greeks and Babylonians, and they want to know what did the Indians learn from the Greeks and Babylonians, and so on. So everybody I've shown in red font here are people who don't believe the antiquity of Indian astronomy and lean towards Indian astronomy has come from Babylon, Greece, and all of these kind of notions. So it goes on to almost our present times, as you can see, with the Nuge Bauer, Pingree, and others. So several Europeans themselves confronted Max Muller and said, should all of Indian chronology be held hostage to the Christian chronology? Christian chronology means at that time they believed God created the world in 4004 BCE and God destroyed the world in Noah's flood in 2400 BCE. And then all of civilization is from the descendants of Ham's children, right? Japheth, Shem, and Ham, and all these kind of people. So with that thinking, they have tried to subvert Indian astronomy to fit into that mosaic model. And the question is that valid? So Max Muller got so upset with this question that he wrote this entire book on it. And this book, he tried to rebut everything in Indian astronomy. He tried to say, I don't believe a single, they're not reliable, they're not robust. He rejected the claims. He rejected everything over there, saying that these are written in different periods of time, forgeries, all kinds of notions came about. So today we know that there's something called confirmation bias, where you have facts and evidence in front of you, but you dismiss that as unreliable. That's what he has done. But he accepted some beliefs through linguistic analysis 1500 BCE. He also believed the biblical creation date of 4004 BCE, and he rejected these things. So given that he selectively took things, it is an evidence of failed methodology, which we call confirmation bias. Anyway, we have even modern scholars like Otto Neugebauer, who wrote this book, Exact Sciences and Antiquity, who also proposed that Indian astronomy is copied from the Babylonians. So in this book, he goes about to make these claims about, for example, the length of the longest to shortest day is the same in Hindu and Babylonian astronomy. He says that he used a certain function to compute a moon's motion at zigzags. He says the same as Babylon because the method algorithm is the same. He presumes that Indians copied from Babylon. There is no evidence to show whether Babylonians took it from India. Where there's a whole host of evidence for that. In my courses, I show that. But such a claim has been made. Then he says the terminology, the zodiac names, all of them match from Babylon, therefore it came from Babylon. And he also claims Varahamihira incorrectly copied constants for planetary motions from the Babylonians. Indians did not have planetary motions according to him or a planetary model, and they copied it from Babylon. And he concludes that Indians have copied from Greeks and Babylon. His student was a famous professor called David Pingree, who passed away recently. So he continued all of his guru's statements, where he claimed that after he first of all, he mistranslated a Nepali copy of Yavaneshwara's Yavana Jataka. And he continued claims from his teacher that Indians have incorrectly copied from Greeks and Babylonians and all of these notions, ratio 3:2, using a linear function for lunar calculation, using water clocks. Indians made use of something called a water clock. And he said this came from Babylon too. Concept of Tithi. Tithi is a fundamental notion in Panchangas of Indians. But then he said even this came from outside of India. Then the use of intercalary months, according to him, Indians did not have this concept. It came from Babylon into India. And the concept of 5-year yuga, that also he says came into Vedanga Jyotisha from Babylon. So these are the kind of claims he came. And Subhash, many people have rebutted him, including Subhash Kak, K.S. Shukla, who corrected several of his mistranslations of Yavana Jataka, as well as Bill Mark. Bill Mark is very, very blunt in his criticism. He says Pingree fabricated findings, misread, conjectured to arrive at his conclusions. So these are some of the things. For example, Shukla's Indian Journal of History of Science, the Yuga of Yavana Jataka, where Pingree's text and translations are reviewed, or Bill Mark on his looking at Greco-Babylonian astral science in Asia, where he's talking about Pingree. So with that as an elaborate background to why Indian astronomy has been corrupted, once again to recap, it is because of 5 frameworks. It is because of Western compulsions that has come to take a certain lens to look at all of Indian history. It has become corrupted. So with that, we'll quickly review what exactly did Indians observe in the skies. So we can see that it makes many celestial observations as well as a cosmology in ancient texts. There are thousands and thousands of texts out there with references to astronomy, but I've just pulled out a couple of them over here. But prior to that, I'll talk to you in brief about the evolution of astronomy. So just like we have Jyotisha Shastra, we also have other old world civilizations like the Babylonians, Greeks, Mayans, Chinese, and others. Even they've had their texts. And primarily, the concerns were with how to mark the passage of time, how to model the celestial objects. And these were things that several ancient civilizations did. Then we see after Galileo, after we had an observational telescopic kind of telescope, then the West invented a new term called astronomy, where everything they were doing with telescope observations was astronomy. And then they said that everything in the old world is astrology, primarily the Indians, not the Greeks, Babylonians, or the Mayans or Chinese. Indians. What Indians did is something called astrology, completely discredited. It's not a science. The modern word for this is astral sciences for predictive Jyotish. And today, astronomy concerns itself with these things. What are the origins of the universe, or in other words, cosmology? Astrometry, trying to find out the position of stars, planets, and planetary science, which includes comets, asteroids, exoplanets discovery, which is a huge thing these days with the transit method and so many other methods. Stellar astronomy, the life cycle of stars, how do stars come about, supernovas, all those kind of things. Galactic astronomy, how do galaxies form, what are their structures, and all of those kinds of things. Astrophysics, to see the physics that governs the laws all across the universe. Astrobiology, trying to explore life outside of the earth everywhere else. And many, many tools are there in modern days. Telescopes, radio telescopes, space radiometry, whole lot of things from ancient times to modern times. This is what we see. If we take a look at what is there in Jyotisha Shastra in the development of astronomy in India, you will see parallels to all of these things. There is cosmology, discussion of origins. There is cosmogony, discussion of life. There are earth studies, just like we have planetary science about seasons, the ayanams, Uttarayana, Dakshinayana, and so on. Astrometry, position of stars, nakshatras, and these kinds of things. Planetary studies, orbits of various planets, these studies are there. Time studies, where many, many calendar developments and refinements are there. Astral studies, one small branch, which is predictive Jyotisha, and the mathematics to model celestial movements. And the tools they used in correspondence with the pre-technological era is various yantras. Yantras are instruments they use. In the proposed course, I plan to talk about several of those yantras. So we are seeing a close parallel. The ancestor of today's modern astronomy really comes from these earlier studies and these earlier branches of study that have been followed in the old world. In the Bharati astronomy itself, we are seeing that very, very early on, observations were encoded into stories. The story of Chandra, for example, is a love story with Rohini and so on. So we are seeing those kind of stories. We are also seeing that wisdom is encoded into stories with metaphors, and these stories have evolved over time. We see that also. We see evidence that mathematics is used to model celestial body movement. There's a gradual development going to pretty ancient times, much before Aryabhatta, and coming on later on, the Siddhanta astronomy, the Karana astronomy, and so on. We are also seeing pretty advanced mathematics and theories for celestial body movements, all the way up to Madhava of Sangamagrama in Trishur in 1400s, or if you go to the Ganesha Daivagnya in 1500s, Maharashtra, or you come all the way to Patani Samanta Chandrasekhar in Odisha in the 1800s, we are seeing a lot of advanced mathematics and theories in use. So there's a clear evolution of Bharatiya astronomy, which is impeded because of several reasons. It's not part of what I want to do here. So like I said, thousands of instances are out there to talk about astronomy. I just given a few instances. For example, cosmology. I pulled out Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. This is written by Rishi Yajnavalkya. And Yajnavalkya is clearly saying Earth is suspended in space. Okay. So this he is challenged in the court. Who? Yajnavalkya, challenged by Rishi Gargi. And she's asking, by what Yajnavalkya is there above heaven and below the earth? She wants to know what is the earth standing on. And Yajnavalkya is saying it is all pervaded by the unmanifested ether. Ether is a Akasha translation of space, what we can loosely say space. It's saying the space above, space below, clearly showing it's floating in space. And if we take the much celebrated Greek ideas, we see in the Homeric tradition, which is around 800 BC and so on, he says Earth is flat, floating on the river Oceanus. In the Hesiod period, where a lot of stories and other things came about in this theogony, he says Gaia, which is Earth, is a flat surface surrounded by water. Thales, very famous for the theorem, he thinks that Earth was a flat disk floating on water. Anaximander, he came about with Earth as a cylindrical shape and floated freely in space. Then one more person believes Earth was flat, floated on air. Pythagoras, spherical Earth, but he did not have a concept what it is resting on. One more person, Earth is a flat disk supported by air. By the time we come to Plato, now we're talking 400 BCE. He says Earth is a spherical entity positioned at the center of the universe. He does not say what it is resting on. Aristotle, talking about Alexandrian time frame, 300 BC, he thought Earth is the center of the universe, remains stationary because Earth is the natural center. So we are seeing that the Greeks have no concept of gravity or space or any such thing. They have no idea why these things are. But Yajnavalkya, who we can date to 2800 BCE based on the astronomy that is there in this text, is now articulating that Earth is floating in space. The same text is also an articulation of gravity. He's answering Gargi and he's calling it the mighty rule of the immutable. He says the sun and moon are held in their position. Heaven and earth maintain their positions, meaning all the planets are maintaining their position because of gravity. He's saying time based on nimisha, based on muhurtas, based on days, nights, fortnights, months, seasons, years, are all held in that place by gravity. Gravity is a cause of time. And he's saying, because of that mighty rule of immutable, some rivers are flowing eastward, some are flowing westward. In other words, the movement of water, everything is governed by this. And today we know gravity affects time through gravitational time dilation, for example. I'm not claiming that Yajnavalkya knew this, but he's articulated that time is also a consequence of this gravity. And we also know that gravity is a force that causes rivers to flow downhill. We know that gravity is a force that keeps planets in orbit around the sun. So all these things are our modern European understandings, but these are articulated in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad long time back. Again, looking at the Greeks, Aristotle, he had a theory of natural places, natural motion. Bodies made of earth and water naturally move towards the center of universe. And he thinks objects made of air and fire move away from the center. This is not gravity. And Archimedes, he did not develop with the concept of gravity. Similarly, Hipparchus, Ptolemy, they also had no concept of gravitational attraction. But we are seeing such articulations in the Indian works. Just to give you a glimpse, I'm not giving exhaustively, just to glimpse of cosmology as the ancient Indians saw that. Indians observed eclipses. One very notable figure is Rishi Atri. He's immortalized in the Rig Veda in this passage, saying that he not only looked at the eclipse, but is also able to discover its properties by the fourth sacred prayer. And there are some people who are trying to say, when did this Atri's eclipse occur? It could be 4200 BC, 3800 BC. Several dates are proposed, but that is not what we are interested in. People mock this description because he used the terms Rahu and Ketu as a demon swallowing the sun. And a whole lot of Europeans, Eurocentrics, missionaries, as well as today's Marxists saying Indians thought there's a demon swallowing the sun and that causes eclipse without even a care to see if it was a metaphoric language. This was articulated by Aryabhatta. Aryabhatta here, he clearly shows the ecliptic is the path of the sun, apparent path of the sun as it appears to go around the earth. And the path of the moon seems to be offset by about 5 degrees over here. Therefore, eclipses will occur when these nodes coincide. So this is one of the nodes, and that is where a solar eclipse will occur. And this is the other node where a lunar eclipse will occur. So he terms this as Rahu and Ketu. So clearly showing these are mathematical understandings of where these things will happen. So very interesting to see that. But what is even more fascinating is that Rishi Atri appears to have made use of something called a Turiya Yantra, which today we understand to be a quadrant. This is a modern quadrant, but the ancient world also had it. For example, here is a quadrant used in China. Huge instruments from which you can measure the altitude of a star, where it is. You can measure that using these things, in just like the protractor that we use today. The Muslims had something constructed like this. In medieval Europe, they used an object like this to do that. So Tilak is saying that, let me go to this one. He's saying that interpret Turiya Brahmana, which is there in this work. The Turiya Brahmana is over here in this work. He says it appears to be a quadrant, which is also mentioned as Siddhanta Shiromani, for example, and through that he's made this observation. So in other words, if you want to know when a solar eclipse will happen, what you must have is a good idea about this angular relationship between the sun and the moon. If you know this angular relationship, then you know as this angle is coming closer and closer to zero, then an eclipse is inevitable. On the day of the new moon, Amavasya, there is going to be an eclipse. So how do you predict it? You will predict it if you can measure the angle. How do you measure the angle? You have a quadrant. And that's what Atri seems to have done. He seems to have understood the model. The model is as I've shown over here. He seems to have understood when this angle goes to zero, then there'll be an eclipse. He also knows when it will start, when it will end, and so on. And that is why he's remembered in the Rig Veda that he knew about this fourth quadrant, this and how eclipses happen. Very fascinating. Indians also observed precession, which is a 25,700 year cycle of the Earth, because of which something called where the vernal equinox will happen, that position keeps changing over time. And I'll show you presently why that is important. But Surya Siddhanta, for example, talks about this, and we can work this figure out to something like 54 arc seconds in a year, whereas the modern estimate is 50.4 arc seconds in a year. Surya Siddhanta was 54 arc seconds a year. Indians also observe transits. Transits are when the inner planets like Mercury and Venus, they go across the face of the sun from our perspective. Here's a photograph that I took in 2016 with this little dot you see here. This is Mercury. It is going across the face of the sun. How on earth would you observe this? I needed a telescope to do this and a CMOS camera to capture this whole thing. So these are called Grahayuti by Indians, and they were able to observe this. And we have accounts by astronomers like Kamalakara, like Mallikarjuna Suri, and others who have actually observed the transit, calling it like a black hole on the sun. This is exactly how it will appear, like a tiny black dot on the sun. How would you see that with the naked eye, or what kind of mechanisms they have? But at any rate, they were able to do these kinds of things. In the West, it's only after Galileo, he used a telescope in 1610, Kepler inherited voluminous data from his predecessor in 1930s. Only then Europeans were in a position to predict the transit of Venus. That was the first in the Western world, whereas it was routine in ancient India. Indians observed planetary conjunctions. They call it a yudh when one planet comes close to another, or a planet and a star, or the sun, moon and a star, moon and a planet. All these things were conjunctions. Surya Siddhanta talks about that. Here is a picture that I took in December 2022. This is the Mars and Moon conjunction. You can see that this little red thing is Mars, and it had conjuncted with the moon. A beautiful picture, as you can see. Lunar occultations, when the moon appears to go across a nakshatra from our perspective, it's called an occultation. And here's an instance 6 when the moon is occulting Kritika nakshatra. So this also I've explained in my TEDx talk. is the reason for the story why Chandra loves nakshatras more than his other wives. The basis is in this occultation phenomena. Indians observed comets. Comets are called Dhumaketu. Many references are there in ancient India to comets in the Rig Veda, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Parashara's works, Vriddhigarga, Varamira, Tamil works, Sangamira works, and so on. But because of the enormous periodicity of the planets or the comets, we cannot reliably say what are these comets that are referenced over here. Only from the 12th century on, we can make an estimate saying, yeah, this comet, so on and so forth. But we have no idea what some of these comets observed here are. Then in a recent talk, I'm looking at the time over here, I'll conclude soon. In the Andromeda galaxy, I have made this bold claim based on some readings I've done in the works. Andromeda is about 2.5 million light years away from the Earth. It's around the same size as the Milky Way galaxy. People may wonder, can you see Andromeda galaxy without a telescope? And the answer is yes. If you have a dark sky, you know where to look, you can see it. And this, in fact, was described by a Persian astronomer called Al-Sufi in 964 current era. He described it as a cloud, a dark cloud. After 1600s, when we had the telescope, observations were made, but Europeans had no clue what this object is. They thought it's a gas in our own universe. They thought the entire universe is just Milky Way galaxy, nothing else. So over here. But then in 1920s, the astronomer Hubble, he measured individual stars in the Andromeda galaxy using a huge telescope he had access to, stars called Cepheid stars, using the standard candles. So you can calibrate those things and make an estimate of how far the stars are. He said they're around 90,000 light years away. His calculation was wrong. It was actually 2.5 million light years away. But it confirmed at that time that it is so far away, it cannot be in our galaxy. That is how Westerners or modern astronomy came to realize that besides the Milky Way, there are other galaxies, and the universe is teeming with galaxies. That only from 1930s or so, such a notion has come about. So with that as background, we see that Andromeda is known in Greek stories, but the Greeks did not observe Andromeda galaxy. It was a constellation, a series of stars that they referenced as Andromeda galaxy, and the art is a maiden who's chained to a rock, and the hero comes and saves her, marries her, and so on. The interesting thing is we have a similar story on Indian side where Sharmistha, she's a daughter of a Daitya king, and Devyani is a daughter of the Rishi, Shukracharya. And one day when they have a bath in the river, the clothes get mixed up, and Devyani wears the princess clothes, and there's a quarrel, and Sharmistha, she pushes Devyani into a well, and she leaves. Later on, the hero, Yayati, comes along, and he saves the Devyani, and they get married. And as atonement, this princess, Sharmistha, is sent to work as a maid of Devyani. But Sharmistha has an affair with Yayati and has children with him. Devyani is super angry, and her father curses Yayati that he'll have premature old age. He cannot enjoy life. You'll become an old man. Then he asks which of his sons will take on his old age. And finally, one of his younger sons says, I will take on your old age. And he gets 1,000 years of youth again. So Yayati enjoys pleasures and he goes to Swarga. But then over there, he has a quarrel with Indra and is expelled. So he starts falling to the earth. So that is a key part of our story. As he's falling to the earth, there is a description about him falling to the earth. So in the Indian tradition, Andromeda galaxy is identified, constellation, is identified as Devyani. And in the winter skies, you'll see a big W constellation of night skies. This is called Cassiopeia, and that's identified as Sharmistha. So like I said, this one over here is Devyani, and this W in the sky, this is Sharmistha. In between them is Andromeda galaxy, this little pale cloud-like object that you see. This is how you'd see it in a dark sky where there's no moon, away from city lights. If you observe carefully, you'd observe Andromeda looking like this, very, very dull. So this is a picture that I took of Andromeda Galaxy. It looks like a dull rain cloud. If you just take one photograph and of a short exposure. So it looks like there's a rishi called Astaka. He's curious to know what is this object. And in the Mahabharata, we see this in the Sambhava Parva over here. And he is describing it as a dark cloud. So Ashtaka, now the rishis have seen all kinds of objects. They've seen stars, they've seen planets, they've seen the moon, the sun, comets, meteors. They've seen all these things. They know what they are. But this is a strange entity in the sky. It's like a cloud. What on earth is this? So they are questioning and talking among themselves. So Ashtaka, the rishi, after seeing Yayati falling from the skies, asks, "Who are you falling from high? You look like the sun emerging from dark masses of clouds." Very critical point, because that's how it looks, like a dark rain cloud in the skies. And he says, everyone is curious what is falling deprived of consciousness. And he speculates, you seem to have a celestial garland. This garland comes from this fuzzy picture that you see around it. You have a garland, and where coming down to the earth. Yayati says, yes, I'm falling down on the earth. Ashtaka says, are there regions for me to enjoy in the heavens? Yayati is saying, there are so many regions here for you. Of animals and horses on earth cannot match that number. Then one more rishi is asking, are there heavens for worlds for me to enjoy out there? And he's saying that there are so many, even if you dwell in them for 7 days, they would not yet be exhausted. It's an articulation of the ancient Indians that this object has got many, many worlds over there, and thousands and thousands of worlds. It seems to be coming towards the earth. That is an articulation that you see. Then in one more place, Astaka asks, whose are those 5 golden cars that we see? And Yayati is saying, yes, they will take you to regions of bliss. And this is a photograph that I took of to show this in 2016, where this cloud have artificially brightened up Andromeda. But these are if you look through a telescope, these are the stars that are yellow stars. They look like golden color. And this is the stars referenced. This helps us to locate what is this Ashtaka referencing. It appears to be this galaxy, and these are the stars. So with this, we can conclude that Yayati is the Andromeda galaxy. We didn't have a word for galaxy, but there's a metaphor about it, and there's a story. And this story is a backstory of Mahabharata. Devyani is the Andromeda constellation. Sharmista is Cassiopeia. In between is her husband Yayati. And he's described as a dark, cloud-like object with countless worlds heading towards the Earth, driven by 5 chariots. The first description of a galaxy, if you will. And we also see Greek stories are copies of Indian stories, and we can see that too. And if you'd like to see how Andromeda looked in February 2024, there's a photograph that I took. And these are 2 satellite galaxies you see. This is one of them, this is the other. This is the core of the galaxy. And these dust clouds would show a spiral if I had taken a better photograph, but this is how it looks. So the next question, the Westerners said Indians copied everything from the Babylonians and Greeks. So the question comes, did Indians even measure the skies? Did they have anything to measure the skies? And we have strong evidence. Siddhanta text, Karana text, these are all talking about Indian measurements of the skies. We can even go to Colebrook, who's a colonial scholar in 1799, Asiatic Research. He is talking about a yantra that is used like a sphere. Suri Siddhanta is talking about it, and that can get you the apparent longitude and latitude. Siddhanta Shiromani is giving even more details about what it is. He's calling it out to be an armillary sphere. Observer is instructed to look at the star Revati through a sight fitted to the orifice. So this over here, I hope you can see my picture over there in the photograph. This is a model of an armillary sphere where you have the Earth at the center, you have the cosmos over here, and you've got scales that help you to identify what these are. So it's basically referencing an that is what we see in this particular work. And Colebrook is proceeding to give a translation of the procedure, how they do it. So there is an observation to get the longitude and the latitude, and to get the true longitude and latitude, there's a mathematical computation that is done. So this is proof of observational astronomy understanding a coordinate transformation is needed for true longitude and latitude. So we're seeing evidence of that. What about evidence of measurements? Because we are told Indians didn't measure, they didn't even observe. So we have 5,000 years of instruments to measure the skies. If you go all the way to Harappa, we are seeing evidence of water clocks. And these were called Gatika. Gatika is a measure of time that takes one pot to exhaust all the water out of it. That duration is a Gatika. These were calibrated. These were calibrated so that it fits into the notion of muhurtas, it fits into the notion of time, and so on. So Indians had these kind of calibrated water clocks in order to measure the passage of time. We are seeing it in Harappa, we are seeing it in Vedanga Jyotisha, and other such works. Aryabhatta is talking about all of these instruments that you see. He even had a globe constructed, which he could operate with a string. And he talks about shadows and other such things with that. Varamira's got all of these things, including graphical calculations like we do XY plotting and all those kind of things. Brahmagupta is talking about quadrant and many other things. Bhaskara is talking about this 600 current era now. He's talking about a circular platform with graduated circumference. This is something that I saw in Lothal. Lothal too has got, Lothal is a Harappa site outside Ahmedabad in Gujarat, and it is dated to about 2800 BCE and so on. And there you see these circular brick platforms, but none of the archaeologists know what it was used for. Well, we know what it is used for. If you see Bhaskara's, this was used to keep track of certain astronomical observations and where they occur and so on. Lalla is talking about armillary sphere. I just showed you an example and so on. So we got clear instruments used. Indians also knew the cardinal points of astronomy, solstice positions, equinox positions, reference planes, horizon, ecliptic, equator, reference points. All these are mathematical necessities in order to construct a coordinate system. That is what we're seeing. When you want to measure the skies, how do you do it? On the globe, we know we have got latitude and longitude, where the entire Earth is divided from pole to pole into latitudes or going from east to west into longitude. So we know these things. We can measure any position on Earth. What about the skies? To just give a mental picture, if you project the longitudes, longitudes of the skies, they become celestial coordinates. But then you can have different reference planes. For example, you could use the equator as your reference plane, and you have the equatorial system. Or you could have an altitude azimuth coordinate system where the horizon is your reference plane and zenith is one of them. Or you could say the apparent path of the sun, that is called ecliptic. That is your reference plane, and that becomes an ecliptic coordinate system. And Indians used this ecliptic coordinate system with the reference longitude, zero longitude or meridian, going through Ujjain and pointing to where the vernal equinox point. That is a point where vernal equinox had happened. That is a reference time. So with that, you could take any star and break it down into ecliptic longitude, ecliptic latitude, and you could describe it. And one more aspect of this is that the vernal equinox point keeps changing over time because of precession. We talked about that briefly. And we have evidence in Indian literature that the nakshatra at vernal equinox point is changing. Mrigashirsha was the first at one point in time, 4000 BC. Then it was changed to Rohini, 3000 BC. Then to Kritika in 2300 BC, Bharani to Ashwini, and so on. So we are seeing clear evidence that the coordinate system reference point is changed over time in Indian astronomy because of precession. That evidence also is there in the Indian works. And again, what is this precession? If you see this graphic over here, this you see that where the Earth is pointing to, axis of rotation, this one is tracing a path in the sky that takes 26,000 years to complete. So because of this, where vernal equinox is happening with reference to a star or a measurement, that keeps changing over time. And Indians have referenced these things. Because of this reference to sidereal astronomy, we are super lucky. We are lucky because we can now use the mathematics of axial precision and tell you precisely when was an observation made, going back in time. And I deal with all of these things in my courses too. In the Surya Siddhanta, we got a description. I'm not going to read all this, lack of time over here, but there's a description which we can compute based on that. For example, Dr. M.L. Raja has given the description. In India, precision was called Ayana Chalana, and this comes out to 54 arc seconds in a year. Very, very amazing figure, especially if you consider what were the other people in other parts of the world doing. Surya Siddhanta, I'm not going to put a date on it, 54 arc seconds. Parashara Siddhanta, which Professor Iyengar has dated to the same time as Vedanga Jyotisha, 1400 BCE, also copies the same figure of Surya Siddhanta, 54 arc seconds. Ritigarga, Abhyankar puts into 800 BCE, and he quotes a figure of 36 arc seconds a year for some strange reasons off over here. Hipparchus the Greek has copied the same figure, 36 arc seconds a year. In China, it was 72 arc seconds. Aryabhatta has got a better estimate than 54, 48 arc seconds. Al-Batani, the Arabs copied all of Indian astronomy after Bin Qasim's invasion of Sindh in 711 current era. They translated Surya Siddhanta into Persian and Arabic, and so they copied the same figure, 54 arc seconds. Munjala, Bhaskara too, and going to Patani, Samandar Chandrasekhar gets better and better. So what we are seeing is Indians have precise measurements. How precise? The modern figure is 50.4 arc seconds. See how close Patani Samantha Chandrasekhar has come in 1900. He didn't have telescopes, naked eye observations using classical Indian measurements, yantras, and measurement techniques. He's able to refine it to 49.17 18, if you will, arc seconds. Amazing number over here. So Pingree, as usual, in his paper over here, 1972, he says Indians copied it. He says it is not unreasonable. Look at the language used in a published journal paper. It is not unreasonable to suppose that the idea of trepidation of precision was introduced into India by the Greeks, though the parameters chosen by Indians are their own. So you have no evidence whatsoever, but you're fitting it to your preconceived notions. This is what we call confirmation bias, right? So those are the kind of ideas that persist even today in textbooks, thanks to heavyweights like Pingree, Neubauer, Max Muller, and others. So there is great evidence of ancient mathematical modeling for astronomy. We don't have the time to do all of these things, but even in the 1400 BC Vedanga Jyotisha, we're seeing something called rule of three. In modern algebra, even a high school kid will tell you this: a by b equal to c by x. You know a, b, and c. You want to find the unknown x, do cross multiplication. You get this. This is what Vedanga Jyotisha is saying. The rule of three. You know three things, you can find the fourth thing over here. But it is saying that is not enough. You can apply this formula again and again and again to get the result that you want. In other words, it is talking about iterative prediction of motion using linear models. It's a linear model. To give an example, if a planet in the sky has moved delta s units in a time delta t, then your question is, in some other time t, how many units does it move? For example, if I observe Mars in 1 week, it is moved by something like this. I want to know 2 weeks later, where is Mars going to be? Well, you apply this formula. The same formula, you get the answer, apply it again and again. And if this delta t tends to 0, observe that the definition of a differential. Differential is limit as delta t tends to 0, this ds by dt, right? That's what it is. This is similar to calculus itself is over here. But anyway, such things are there in Vedanga Jyotisha. This is completely overturning what the West says. The West says in Neo-Babylon, Neo-Babylon is 600 BCE. In Babylon, they have evidence from cuneiform texts that they were keeping track of the movement of Jupiter. And they said that's a first in the world. But then we have in Vedanga Jyotisha, which is 1400 BC, already talking about this kind of thing. We have evidence that linear is not enough. Western claims Hipparchus is the father of trigonometry, but this is an absurd claim because what they had were chord tables. This is a chord table. A chord table is not trigonometry. Trigonometry is right angle triangles. Every high school kid will tell you this. Right angle triangle is trigonometry. Trigonometry is there in Surya Siddhanta. It is there in Aryabhatta. And maybe the 18 Siddhantas that came prior to Aryabhatta, which are lost with time. We don't have them. But anyway, they have a fully developed trigonometric model in Aryabhatta, Bhattiya, Surya Siddhanta, and so on. So we are seeing development of trigonometry. We are seeing that they work towards high accuracy because you can use a linear model to predict even 1 year in time, but then it is going to be wrong. Why will it be wrong? Because space is curved. Because it is curved, you cannot use linear over here. You must have not only trigonometry, circular functions, you must also have spherical geometry to do things of this nature. We are seeing evidence that Aryabhatta used linear interpolation. Bhaskara had analytical formulas for sin x of this nature. Brahmagupta, linear is not enough. He needs second order interpolation. He's used second order interpolation to compute sine values. And by the time we come to Madhava and Kerala school in 1400s, he's got infinite series to approximate a sin x function, cos x function, tan inverse function. Clear evidence that people are observing. They had a mathematical model. Observation did not match the mathematical model, so they had to go through a process of novel refinements. They had to invent the mathematics in order to make that better and better. This is what we do today as scientists. We are seeing evidence of this in the ancient works. So all this I cover in my coursework. And that comes to the last slide that I'm going to show to you today. This is the course that I plan to offer at the Hindu University of America. A pilot version of this course is currently underway, but this will soon be offered in July in the Hindu University of America. I will talk first about astronomy in ancient Indian pre-Siddhanta texts. I gave you a glimpse of that, talking about Earth suspended in space, the notion of gravity, a notion of cosmology, a notion of life. All these kind of ideas are there in pretty ancient works. These have got nothing to do with Siddhanta works, but they are there in it. Then we move on to coordinate systems. What coordinate systems did Indians use? How did they measure the skies? I gave you a glimpse of that today. The nakshatra and Rashi models, the evolution of those models and the problems in that, the controversies in that, and the measurements of those things, how Indians kept time, the passage of time, the lunar, solar year, and many more things, the mathematics of a panchanga, which is the traditional Indian calendar, and the synchronisms that arise from those things. What are the mathematical reasonings for all of those things? Then going on to planetary modeling. How did they model the planets using epicycles and things of that nature? Then advanced mathematical modeling for astronomy from Aryabhatta, all the way to Madhava. Then we talk about historicity of Indian astronomy. How old is Indian astronomy? We address that question. Then we discuss some famed Indian astronomers and their works. We see the kind of things they did. Then we go to the 9th class to assessing Western claims on Indian astronomy. I gave you a glimpse of that today. Then we see finally in the 10th class, what is the impact of Indian astronomy on the world? In the first slide, I showed you all the things that modern astronomy is concerned with were also concerns of the ancient Indians. The instrumentation differs. Today, we have got the electromagnetic spectrum. We have got understanding of waves, all the way from very, very long wavelengths to very, very short wavelengths, infrared to ultraviolet in the near visible range and far beyond that. We send satellites over there with different instrumentation to capture the universe in these different wavelengths. So the instruments have differed. Indians worked only in the visible range because they didn't have X-ray measurements, ultraviolet measurement, infrared measurement like the James Webb is doing. They didn't have all these things, just visual astronomy. So in the visual range, they have investigated all the topics that modern astronomy is concerned with. So they're the precursors, if you will, for modern astronomy. We are going to look at that impact, how Indian astronomy impacted the Arabs, how it went from the Arabs to Western Europe and seeded the so-called scientific revolution. Prior to that, how did it go to the Babylonians? How did it go to the Greeks? All these things we study in this last class. So the course will handle these things in a series of 10 classes. Each class will be about 90 minutes to 120 minutes each, and we will address these things. So in conclusion, I talked about a lot of things today. Indian deep history taught in schools and universities is utterly wrong. We are being taught nonsense, criminal nonsense in schools. 5 agencies have imposed their ideologies and frameworks. They control the writing of history in India today: colonial, Eurocentric, missionary, socialist academia, and the Marxist. The linguistic methodology is used by them to uphold their narratives. In my courses, I show this linguistic methodology in the claims, they do not align with evidence from many other fields. Therefore, we falsify the outlier. Outlier is linguistic theory. We say that is wrong, and so on. So I have discussed a few things in Indian astronomy today, identifying galaxy, Andromeda galaxy as IIT, for example. I did not talk much about the planetary model and accuracy. Talk to you about precision by ancient Indians. The mathematical model, we talked very little about that. And I discussed this upcoming course, the history and methods of Indian astronomy, which I'll offer in July or so. All right, with that, we have come to the end of the webinar. I will stop sharing here and open it up for questions.
Yeah, amazing presentation. The scope that you covered in an hour and 10 minutes, amazing. So let me drop a link to the course in the chat, History and Methods of Indian Astronomy. That's the link. It's going to be on Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Dr. Vedam says 90 minutes to 2 hours, but it's usually closer to 2 hours because the conversation, the questions, the engagement, especially the first time that you're teaching this. I guess you're doing kind of a pilot right now, and
Right.
kind of curious on how it's going. But as you ramp up, I know the conversations go on until you have to cut it off. Actually, you don't cut it off. That's why it goes on so long. You take everyone's questions until they're exhausted. Yes, Dr. Divya says, thank you very much. This was a fantastic and wonderful presentation. Miss Sophia, really amazing presentation, hearts. We appreciate your vast knowledge, Dr. Vedam. Amazing content backed by history, science, and proof. Wonderful introduction. Rina G says, thank you very much. Right, this was an introduction, an overview, and he covered so much information. So please do consider taking one of his courses. Let me put the poll up. Let us know if you're interested in taking this History and Methods of Indian Astronomy. So I have that poll up. Please let us know. Yes, definitely. If you have questions, maybe, no, just helps us get to it. Is that Kalyan Vishwanathan Ji, or is that a different Kalyan Ji? In the attendance has a hand up. They just raise their hand. If you want to voice a question, raise your hand in the participant window. Dr. Vedamji, we have about 11 open questions in the Q&A box. Kumaji is starting with the big question. This happens all the time. Who are the Aryans then? If they didn't exist, if they were just nomadic illiterates traveling, and then also the converse she's asking. So no Dravidians existed. Maybe that high level of because there's so much, like you're saying, the agenda, the divide and conquer mentality, putting those different divisions into it. If you want to just talk about that briefly.
Sure. I'm looking at the questions right now, and I see Uma Gupta. So no Dravidians existed in the second one. Who are the Aryans? So yes, so it is a nuanced statement. You have to take it very, very carefully what I'm saying. And the short webinar like this, there is no way we can address a question of this nature. When I say it's a manufactured identity, there are reasons for that. There are many, many reasons for that. You will have to take my two-part course at HUA to understand the evidence for this heavy statement that I just made over here. It turns out that there is no evidence for something called Dravidians in the genetic record. That is one of the main things. It also turns out that there's no word called Dravidian itself in any of our literature. We only have words called Arya and Dravida. Arya is an honorific for a noble person. If I have noble qualities, I'm an Arya. For example, an example of an opposite of that is Dushasana. Dushasana, because he disrobed Draupadi, right? That is not what a noble person would do. So he's called an Anarya. That's an example of that. Dravida is a Sanskrit word that means the waters meet, literally. So it's referring to the southern part of India. It's a geographical identifier. So the racial identifiers of Aryan and Dravidian were introduced by Westerners. In this case, it was Robert Caldwell, who introduced the English word called Dravidian to refer to southern Indians. So what was a geographical identifier in India became a so-called racial identifier. The question you must ask is, what is race? Can we identify race at the genetic level? Can anybody anywhere in the world say these are the mutations associated with this race? these are the mutations associated with this race. No, I'm sorry. It's not a scientific word. It is a social, emotional word, race. There is no such thing at the genetic level. At the genetic, scientific, observational, measured level, we have all got certain mutations. So very, very slight differences from each other. But it doesn't mean that only these people have got these mutations, only those people have got those mutations. There are attempts to do that, but these are all failing because of several other reasons. So there is no such thing as Dravidians. Who are the Aryans? We need to go and ask these colonial people who the Aryans are, because they're the ones who introduced this word. They said that these are the people who came from Central Asia in 1500 BC into India. Completely no evidence. Whether it is in linguistics, we can interpret the linguistics methods they have used and show that there is no evidence of invasion. There is no evidence, of archaeological record of a pottery change. At the supposed time when a new civilization has come into India, they must bring their technology. Their technology must be pots, for example. There is no evidence in the Indian records that there is in 1500 BC, suddenly we see a new kind of pots coming into India. No evidence of that. There is no evidence in any cultural memory of India. Any cultural memory of India, any period of time, any geography you go, any author you take, nobody is saying that we are Aryans, they are Dravidians, we used to live outside India, beyond the mountains, we came to India, we killed all these people, we pushed those people to the south. In the south, nobody's saying we used to live in the north and then we were pushed down to the south, defeated. In fact, the south, Tamil people have got Sangam era knowledge that there were three Sangam periods. A cultural memory is there. The Sangam period goes back 10,000 years. The first literary period, supposedly 10,000 years, lasting for 3,000 year duration. Then the second Sangam period, another 2,000, 3,000 years. We are now the third Sangam period, literally. So Tamil people have got a memory of submerged lands and other such things going back to an ancient period of time. They don't have memory of they were living in northern India, they were pushed down to the south. So much of common sense is staring at us in the face every day, but we are being deluded by the Western narrative that we are Aryans, we are Dravidians, and we are Northerners, we are Southerners, we are to fight each other. All this kind of nonsense. The divisive model has been put in over there. So yes, there are no such thing as Aryans, no such thing as Dravidians. You're welcome to ask me follow-on questions that will address doubts on that. Krishnan Mithal is asking a question. Can you please shed more light on people who contradicted Max Muller's conclusions? Who are the people who contradicted Max Muller's assertions? Many people are there today who are Indic scholars who are trying to address some of the assertions. There are several assertions. Max Muller is one of the sources. Max Muller's works have been used by modern day scholars, so it's in a way continuation. People like Michael Witzel and other ideas, and they have been rebutted by several people. There are Edwin Bryant, for example, is one person who wrote a book on, forget the name of the book, the Indo-Aryans, I guess. So that has got a lot of compilations of work. Michel Danino is a professor at Gandhinagar. So he talks a lot about the lack of evidence and the charlatanism done by many of these researchers who propose AIT, AMT, and those kinds of things. We have people like Conrad Elst. We have got several people today, Srikant Thalagiri, and many others who are talking about these.
Great. Dr. Vedam, we're at 9:17. We have maybe about 10 minutes and we need to conclude. This webinar will not go until we deplete all the questions. So there more and more questions are coming in. People want to ask questions. So please cherry pick and choose some higher level stuff. And hopefully this will encourage you to take the course. There is so much interesting stuff in this field that Dr. Vedam is so knowledgeable and can elaborate on with evidence and facts. So thank you for those questions. Sorry to say we won't be able to get to them all, but I'll defer to Dr. Vedam.
So there are, Miss Sophia is asking a couple of questions here on translations of works. It's difficult to say which, because every work has got some issue or the other. It's not as if once you take a translation of the work, it can be understood in toto, understood. Because these works are written in such terse language, you can't simply translate them. It has got to be interpreted. Then the question is, are the interpretations right? The people who have interpreted them, have they got it right? And there are issues with that. Burgess translation is one of them. But there are problems. What did Indians use? Did they use ecliptic coordinate systems? Did they use equatorial? Did they use polar coordinate systems? There are issues of that nature, technical issues, which could confuse you. So I'm not going to answer that question. As for translations of Upanishads for identifying astronomical topics, there's not just one. It is scattered in all of the Vedic literature. So you'll have to take a whole host of Vedic literature to see that. And there are Western translations problematic, but even Western translations, we can get data for these things. Please see my talks, and over there I've given some instances. Sashi Kusuma Tilak wrote eloquently, either believed or accepted AIT. Is it true? How can we explain this? Yes, it is true. So Tilak wrote his book, Orion, in which he presumed that these Aryans were from the polar regions. So it goes to show that even somebody who was a great scientist in many other respects fell to the propaganda of linguistics. Linguistics was the big thing, 1900s to 1950s or so. Linguistics was the thing. Everybody was talking, just like today, AI, artificial intelligence. If you don't say AI, then maybe you are primitive or backward in technology, right? That is the kind of notion that has come out there. Just like that, linguistics was the overriding thing. Great people like, for example, Pargeter. Pargeter was a British judge who questioned Aryan invasion theory in 1920s. But even he was brushed aside because the power of that narrator of linguistics was so powerful. Tilak was one more such person who believed in that. P.V. Kane believed in it. Many of the great Indians, they believe the Westerners are onto something when they're talking about linguistics. Today, with the benefit of time and the data that we have, we can take a more critical look at it. Okay, let me go on. What is the next question? I'll take a question that others have not asked. Ram, a brilliant presentation. Please throw light. Puranic literature mentions earth uphold. You explained Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So, Ram, the question you asked is about other Puranic literature is talking about earth held up by a series of tortoises and elephants and all this kind of things. So the language in Puranas is metaphoric. So it's not easy to understand that. There's a clear distinction between Puranic literature and the Vedic literature. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad goes to the Vedic literature to a very ancient period of time. Puranas also go back to Vedavyasa around 2800 BC, and from there on, corrected over time. A lot of corrections coming over there. The language is metaphorical. We cannot take it in isolation, translated word for word, and then start laughing at the mythology. We'll have to see, is there a deeper meaning in it? I'm not going to address it over here, but we'll continue. Dr. Divya, these courses, what program are they part of? I think Ankur can write that.
Yeah, let's. I'm pretty sure this will be an elective in the certificate program of Hindu Studies in the Community Education Division. I think this this astronomy course will fit into that Community Education Division in the certificate program for Hindu Studies. And so again, we don't want you to just take one course and think you know everything. Of course, that's not what it is. We have whole certificate programs, master's degrees, graduate programs. So depending on where you are at, you can enroll in a series of courses and get that clarity and confidence as a Hindu that we are so lacking as a civilization. And it's, again, Dr. Vedam goes into how even some Indian greats get manipulated by the overarching trends of the time. What we are a part of here at Hindu University of America is overturning those trends and really setting a new civilizational narrative. And history is so crucial to that. Dr. Vedam, you know, I've been a public school teacher in Los Angeles, LAUSD, and it is infuriating what's in the textbooks at the K through 12 level, all the way to the peer-reviewed journals. And so your work is so important. Please take this course. And part of your course is, you know, writing the papers, putting that information together and getting it out there. This is a task for all of us with Dr. Vedam leading the way. Thank you for your work, Dr. Vedam. Just a few more questions.
Okay, let me quickly at random pick a few over here. One is about anonymous attendee about Zoroastrianism, religion, and Vedic faith, uncanny resemblance, and why is that so? So please do look at the works of Srikant Thalagiri. Thalagiri is proposing an east to west there in the books of the Rig Veda, and he's given an enormous number of evidences showing that. and how the later books of the Rig Veda are coming towards the Persian region. And that is where the overlaps are happening. And that is where similarities can be appearing. So please do take a look at that. Astronomy, in your course, you touch upon the original date of Uttarayana, Makar Sankranti, has shifted by 26 days due to precision. Modern dates have no long correspondence. Yes, we'll be talking in great detail about all of these things. We'll be talking about the ideal measurements, the algorithmically ideal measurements, and the practical observational discrepancies and why they arose. We will go in detail with many of these things and we'll be discussing that. Yes. R.S. Venkatachalam, in our system, Mars is considered as Bhumi Putran, and Mars is very much like Earth. The explored interpretation will be different if an incorrect, if this is not understood, if we consider also intelligent, how can we understand? Yes. So the first question, Venkatachalam, please do go to medium.com, rajvedam.medium.com. Over there, I have tried to interpret several Indian Puranic stories in light of the potential science or observations behind it. So I've got an interesting series of them, which also, so do take a look at that. If we consider ourselves intelligent, how can we accept culture or highly could be nomadic? Yes, yes, absolutely. But this is the narrative that the West is put up. Illiterate nomads came from Central Asia into India, and they had no civilization because we see Harappa was advanced, but then India goes through a deterioration in the urbanization in everything. Therefore, they were primitive, illiterate, till Magadha made contact with Greeks, blah, blah, blah. All these things continue. So that is what we are addressing in my course. I address all these paradoxes and say why and so on. Deeptanshu Gautam mentioned the Rishi Atri notes, Mandela is mentioned, Ritri is safe to say fifth Mandela. No. We can't make these conclusions based upon the appearance of the name of the Rishi Atri in various places, in the Rig Veda Mandalas, later on in the Valmiki Ramayana and others. We cannot make such conclusions that they were one and the same person. So it could have been, but we have to, as scientists, we have to see all the alternate possibilities and then evaluate one after the other for consistency. So one of them is, can the name Atri be an honorific in his sampradaya? The Rishi Atri and his descendants might have taken on the name of their ancestor because all their knowledge came from Atri. So even if they design something new, they will not claim that it is mine. They wouldn't plagiarize. They will honor their ancestor saying Atri's knowledge is over here. So this is the kind of situation that we have. So one has got to carefully unravel these claims and see what is going on. I'll take somebody who have not answered. Nilesh, correct to say Poulis' Siddhanta is based on Greek astronomy and Paul is one of the five Siddhantas. No, we cannot conclude that. Is Poulis' Siddhanta? Is that from our Romaka Siddhanta? Because we had a Rishi called Pulisa. We had a similar kind of things. We cannot conclude that these were a Greek astronomer, because what is Greek? In the Indian context, we had something called Yavana. Yavana, loosely, some people say, is Iona. Iona is where Greece, one of the islands over there, and so on. So the point is, we cannot conclude it. To Indians, everything outside of the region could have been Yavana to start with. But then we have to also look at the contents of these so-called Siddhantas. What was inside that? Is there any content over there that claims that can conclusively say it came from Greece or elsewhere? So that is not the case. So only name matching is there. Because of names, we can't conclude things. Though there are claims out there by Thibault, who translated Varahamira's works. He says that this is what it is. But one has got to carefully evaluate the claims to do that. Reena, is there any book for young kids to read or plan a course? No, I don't plan to start a course for kids because the content is already too much over here. As you can make out, it's the graduate level. It is not a high school level. But I encourage you as a parent to take this course and translate this into a form suitable for children. And who knows, maybe you can be a leader tomorrow in taking this to kids all over. Dr. Raj is saying monumental.
Yeah, let me read Dr. Raj Bomakanti's. The monumental research work of Dr. Raj Vedam eclipses the brand equity of the likes of Carl Sagan, yes, that's a high compliment. How come we collectively are not able to market Dr. Vedam in the wider Western academia? He should be thrust into every astronomy department in the West. We are glad to have him as a prominent member of HUA faculty, and we are trying to present Dr. Vedam. And Dr. Vedam goes out and speaks. If you would like him to come to your mandir or a local group, he is traveling and making these presentations in person, and that is exactly what we're doing. Dr. Bomakanti Raji is glad to have you on this webinar saying that. Thank you for that compliment for on behalf of Dr. Vedam. And maybe with that, Dr. Vedam, we could go on some concluding thoughts. Yes, please, amazing webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but this monumental research that Dr. Vedam is doing is not can't be contained to just one webinar. So please take the course, invite him to speak at your mandir or your local group. We will continue to elevate this knowledge where and when we can. Dr. Vedam, with that, let me hand it to you for closing thoughts.
I have no closing thoughts. Thank you for this opportunity. It is nice to talk about these things. The subject is vast. It is not trivial. It's thousands and thousands of years of development of astronomy. There is so much to say. How do you curate saying these are the important things and these are not important? Even that is a difficult topic. Right now, there's a pilot underway, and that will lead to a second iteration where I can curate these topics a little better. But anyway, it has been a real pleasure to talk about this. So thank you, Ankur. And I hope to see many of you who are interested to take up this course. And also, please do encourage people in your circles to take up this course. If you want to search for my works, please go to YouTube and search for my name, Raj Viam. You'll find a lot of my talks over there. So you can have some idea of the kind of background that I have in this area. And do encourage others to join too. So thank you very much.
Great. Namaste. Thank you all. Dhanyawad.
Thank you.